Hi, folks. Welcome to topic 3. Okay, week 3. We're gonna talk about chapter 3 today. Okay, talk about chapter 3, the clinical assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. This is one of the big chapters that you really need to know if you're planning to become a counselor, psychologist, working with people. You really need to understand how you would be able to diagnose and see people as well. Okay, we're not going to talk so much about treatment. Like I said, there's different class for that for treatments. But this class, I want you to focus on the assessment and also understanding of the clinical assessment and how you would diagnose people. Okay, so first one, we're really going to look in terms of the assessment of how you actually gather information as a counselor, as a clinician, and when I work, I actually um, work as a intake person, which means that I did intake therapy for quite some time, several years, almost 6-7 years of doing intake. Basically, I would triage people at the hospital, and also even with the mobile crisis team, would go into the people's home, and actually when they really need intervene it, providing intervention there. You really need to actually observe patient not just from what you hear from them, but also their body language, their facial expression, their stories, things like that as well. Being really observant to be able to come up with the clinical diagnosis. Um, you don't want to just kind of rely on one specific things, but trying to understand things as a whole, as a person, where they're coming from, looking at their body language, looking at their eye contact, their hand gesture, their movement, the way they sit, the way they walk. All of those play a big role in terms of understanding the diagnosis, what kind of diagnosis that you could have come up with them. But in terms of the assessment tools, there are things that we could do to help you, test them a lot easier. Um, some of these stuff you will have it in the test and measurement. There's a class called test and measurement that will really focus on a lot of these. Um, and it's more of, if you really with the actual writing tests and all of these tests, this is more pertain to, like, if you want to become a school counselor, or actually a school counselor or a school psychologist. That would you would do a lot of testing if you're a school psychologist. We do have couple of people who are school psychologists here on staff. You could actually, if you're interested in that field, I would you know welcome you to talk to them, so they could give you some pointer how to get there as well. So the one of the things that you're gonna be doing, definitely in the field, you're gonna be doing the mental status exam. If you dealing with people, in the ER, or people who are, with geriatric population who have Alzheimer, you're gonna do a lot of mental status exam to see whether they know. Do they know what's going on? Are they still on the same planet as you are? Are they still, hearing you and be able to comprehend that they are still alert and oriented? They may they may be alert but may not be oriented, or they cannot provide information back. So let's see. So clinical interviews. There are pros and cons of clinical interviews. Sometimes you may not be able to, especially if you deal with a lot with addiction, substance abuse. Uh, there's a lot of question about accuracy. Yeah, I only drink once a week. Usually, I always multiply by three, the rule of thumb. So if they say once a week, that's mean 3 times a week. If they said I only have 3 beers a day, well, that usually means 6 beer or 9 beers a day. So you might want to multiply it by 2 or 3. Rule of thumbs usually. Okay. So there's several different clinical tests that you could do. There's projective testing, personality inventory. So all of these, on if you were to deal with mental illness patients, usually you don't use a lot of these. You only use this if you are a psychologist, or you use it to determine their IQ, or trying to find out certain information that they keep deep inside them. Like this one, this is a projective test, meaning that they're using their unconscious, projecting their unconscious to the test, like Rorschach and TAT, having them draw stuff. These are the extent that you probably will use in the field, and this is the not Rorschach. The Rorschach you have to become a psychologist to be able to interpret this test. It's more mathematical test, but the rest of these you definitely can do part of your assessment. So like your TAT, your ink blot, I'm sure you guys seen those. TAT is just have them look at the picture and then have them explain. What is she thinking? What is she saying? What is she angry about? What is she sad about? You want to kind of project that feeling or emotion, and letting the patient or client expressing those emotion or feelings. So you kind of see the trend or the theme. So what you want to do is you want to find like black and white picture or drawings, maybe about 10 of them, 5 to 10 of them. So, and ask them about similar question: what happened before? What happened after this picture? What's going on now? What is she looking at? What is she saying? What is she gonna say? You know, going back and forth. So this is what it does, is actually help forcing the client and the patient to project their feelings onto the person, onto the picture. So that's why it's a projective type of test, where you just want to see what their unconscious, what things that they keep them, and their unconscious, letting that some of those out. Okay, same thing with this. Freud actually used this, like sentence completion. This is part of the psychoanalysis. I wish, have them complete the sentence. My father is, my father hates, my father loves. You know, even provide a word for them. Whichever word you want them to fill in. I hate, I like, I love, to do what? Have them complete those sentences, and it will help them. DAP and kinetic family test. This is a fun test. If you ever want to learn more about this, I could actually demonstrate this with you guys in a live session, and then see what you come up with. Pretty fun test to do. This is DAP. We often use these with kids and teenagers. Actually works extremely well with kids and teenagers, because they just want to kind of projecting their feelings out. Especially, you'll be surprised what they actually draw. There's a lot of things that kind of hidden. Even adults sometimes, we use some of these tests to see what's the unconscious thing that you have in your mind. Okay. There's personality tests. This is not useful in terms of clinical settings, but very useful in other settings, like if you want to kind of touch base with the person, or more like if you want to, for the job, or for certain diagnoses that they want to come up with, for like official diagnosis. You could use MMPI or MMPI-2. This is actually a pretty good test to see whether they could tell you whether you are depressed, you are anxious, whether you have schizophrenia, whether you're lying through the test. The test could tell you that. If you apply for certain jobs, and they actually have these questions, like 170, the shorter version is 176, I believe. The longer version is like 300 or 200, 300 questions. And they ask you like agree or disagree. There's hundreds of them, more at least. That's pretty much this test here. And they from that test they could tell the employer whether you're lying through the test, whether you're depressed, you have a tendency for depression, you have tendency for anxiety, you have tendency for schizophrenia. It's just a simple question that they ask repeated over and over again. So some places I know, like Walmart, does use that, and some places like Costco too as well use that in their part of their application process. Okay. What I want to get to is talking about the DSM-5. There's other type of scan as well, MRI, PET scan, CAT scan, that we use. Intelligent testing. Again, a lot of these testing you will have a class that focus on the test itself, like test and measurement. If you're interested in those class, we have actually a really good person teaching that class now. What I want to focus on is the DSM-5. DSM-5 is how we diagnose patient here in the U.S. This is the diagnostic manual that we use that have more than 400 disorders. One thing that you need to know is that DSM-5 is not universal, meaning that not every country actually accepts DSM-5. If you go to France, France actually they have their own diagnostic manual. They don't use DSM-5 at all. So you go to England. England does have their own manual, but they do adapt DSM-5 as well. So they're using both. Same thing with World Health Organization. They actually have their own manual that they use. They use kind of DSM-5 as a reference. They use part of DSM-5, kind of pick and choose. So again, DSM-5 is only pertain to the U.S. population, because a lot of these things, a lot of these mental illness, again, abnormalcy is based on the the U.S. population, not the world population. And so the changes, we made several changes in terms of DSM-5, quite a big thing, and this is one of your DQs that you really have to come up with, is that it took them almost 10 years, more than 10 years to actually make a change. They have a DSM-4, they have some sort of text revise. We play around with that for a long time, and then eventually they decided to change. But some of the major changes that happen here is they remove certain categories, reorganize categories, change some of terminologies. They added the autism spectrum disorder instead of just autism. Now there's a spectrum. There's a variation of autism, Asperger as well. They kind of combine those under the autism spectrum. OCD, you guys could read through some of these, like hoarding behavior, body dysmorphia. We'll talk about all of these. PTSD, now they have their own category under stress disorder. It used to kind of clump up with anxiety. Now they take it out from anxiety and put under stress disorder. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder, now PMS have its own category, interestingly. And somatic symptoms, we're going to talk about that, definitely have its own category now. We changed the term hypochondriasis. There's a lot of negative connotation with hypochondriasis. Now the new term is illness anxiety disorder. There's a really brand new category, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So this is kind of geared toward kids, kids who have unable to control their mood and their feelings and their anger. So binge eating disorder, that's another one we see more of in the society. We recognize gambling disorder, part of the addictions, part of the substance abuse disorder. So interestingly, we also classify gender identity disorder as well, changing that term with the new term of gender dysphoria. So we'll talk more about that in chapter 11. And we replacing the term mental retardation. Again, there's a negative connotation with mental retardation. New term is intellectual developmental disorder. So kind of more official term, I would say. Yep. So there's these few things that you might want to look over in terms of the changes. And one of the things that last thing I want to talk about is about labeling. I know as a counselor, as a therapist and counselor, technically speaking, labeling and diagnosing is not really truly necessary for the treatment. Let's put it that way. So you don't need to label someone, or you don't need to diagnose someone in order to treat them. That's the fact. You don't really need to say that you have depression, you have bipolar, and then therefore I could treat you. The true purpose of diagnosing is one thing only, is for billing. You billing your insurance, you billing your um, you know building the insurance, building the clinic, building the state. That's the main purpose of diagnosing. Okay, and a lot of time, patient could take the diagnosing couple of ways. If you tell them that, oh yeah, you have depression, they could use it as a crush. They could say, oh yeah, I did this because I have bipolar. I did this because I'm borderline. And you're gonna see that if you work in a state programs, you're gonna see a lot of patient does that, where like, yeah, because I have borderline, it's okay for me to do this because I have borderline. Okay, so it become a crush for them. It's become an excuse for them to saying, yeah, so what? Oh well, I can't help myself because I have borderline, I have bipolar, I cannot help myself. So it makes it as a crutch, which I don't really support that in that sense, because a lot of time nowadays people use it almost like a daily thing. They use it as like they're wearing a purse, like, oh yeah, I have depression, and I also have anxiety, I'm also OCD. Oh yeah, see, they just kind of use it as kind of like a flashy term, as a purse. Like, look at my purse. I have Prada or Louis Vuitton. Um, but instead of that, they use depression, anxiety, OCD as their purse, saying that, showing off, like, yeah. It used to be that when you diagnose someone, people are like, oh, you have mental illness. Oh my God, you have mental illness. But now it's people are like, wow, Lily, I'm so sorry you have mental illness. Oh, I'm sorry you have depression. I hope you feel better. People become more sympathetic to these folks. So a lot of people using this as crutch to actually help them. Or you could have the person completely opposite to that extreme, where you tell them like, yeah, you have depression, and they really like look at everything, going online, going to every single website, WebMD, and every single places, and finding everything out about depression. And then they will come into your office and tell you like, oh yeah, I read about this, I read about that it helps, or I read about this and that, and literally blowing out their depression into blowing out of proportion. So I really think, and there's also I'm not saying that there are not people that in the middle of the line. There are people in the middle of the line that who appreciate the diagnosis and then trying to understand it and then trying to help improve themselves, which is good. But for the most part, majority of people kind of end up on the two extreme end that I described. That they either completely using it as a crush, or they use completely using it as literally devoted themselves to that diagnosis, and then trying to do everything they can, uh, trying to become an expert in that diagnosis. So technically, for the purpose of counseling, you as a counselor, you don't really need to let your patient know what they have. If they ask you, I mean, you could tell them, would that really help you improve your condition? If I tell you whether you have anxiety, OCD, depression, bipolar, you would be cured in that instant? Not really. So, and you rather have patient, your client, instead of focusing on what happened in the past, what had happened to them, and what kind of diagnosis they have, rather than focusing on then their recovery process, then how they could improve themselves, how can they get back to that saddle again, how can they get back to where they were again. That would be more beneficial, more helpful for them, instead of labeling and giving them the stigma that they don't really need. Uh, Obviously, there's other counselor who actually seeing things completely different than my point of view, but as a person who worked in the field for more than 10 years, 15 years in the mental health field, this is what I see, and this is the tendency that I tend to see in my patient. And the key word here, self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of time they, like those two extreme, they could have this self-fulfilling prophecy as well. Okay. Um, so so that's what labeling. Something that you have to keep in mind. And one thing, also another thing that I forgot to mention is that a lot of these diagnoses could go into spectrum, continuum. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's say if you draw a line, you draw a straight line, okay? On one end, you have depression. On the other end of depression, you will have euphoric, which is manic, way too happy. Most people kind of in the middle. Most of us are actually stay in that middle field, okay? So any diagnosis that you always a continuum. How depressed are you? Are you very little depressed, mildly? Are you extremely depressed? So everything is this on a continuum line. It's actually on the continuum, how far you actually are on this line. If you are too happy, you could become manic. You could be hypomanic, very energetic, or manic, completely go crazy things. So where are you in this on this continuum line? So when you diagnose patient, always keep that in mind, that things are in this continuum, that there's people can be on different end of this line. People could be on different place of this line. You could have two people depressed, but their depression level may not be the same. One person still could go to work, the other one to stay in bed and cry all the time. So you have different. We used to call it GAF. We don't have GAF anymore because it's not useful. But there's continuum in terms of severities of the person, of how severe they are. Okay, so keep that in mind when you think about diagnosis, when you look at these diagnoses. Once again, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.